You're listening to KZSC's Voces, Criticas, Critical Voices. I am your host, Silvana Falcone. Today I have with me Casey Coonerty Protti, the second-generation owner of Bookshop Santa Cruz. Born and raised in Santa Cruz, Casey graduated from the University of California at Berkeley, where she received the John Gardner Public Service Fellowship. After working for various nonprofit and philanthropic organizations focused on at-risk youth, she received a joint master's in public administration and master's in business administration at Harvard and Northwestern universities, respectively. Casey returned to Santa Cruz to run daily operations at Bookshop Santa Cruz in 2006 and currently serves as the chair of the Downtown Commission for the City of Santa Cruz. She lives in Santa Cruz with her husband and 2 kids, and most importantly, she loves to read. I've invited her here to talk about Bookshop Santa Cruz's year-long programming called Words to Act On: Education, Empathy, and Activism. This fall, Bookshop Santa Cruz has partnered with the Santa Cruz County Immigration Project for the Words to Act On program. From now through November, Bookshop Santa Cruz has organized a series of events to have a community-wide conversation, quote, on the challenges facing immigrants and the issues involved in the immigration debate. SCCIP's mission is to promote the well-being of the immigrant community in Santa Cruz County and the Pajaro Valley. They accomplish this by helping immigrants acquire legal status, reuniting immigrant families, and making U.S. citizenship more accessible to eligible immigrants. They provide competent and professional legal services, advocacy, and community education and information. Please go to the Bookshop Santa Cruz for more information about these fall events and to support their Fund a Need campaign. You can access Bookshop Santa Cruz on the World Wide Web at www.bookshopsantacruz.com. Welcome, Casey, to KZSC's Voces Criticas.
Thanks for having me.
So Bookshop Santa Cruz is such a long-standing and well-regarded local business in the community. What does it mean to you to have that kind of community respect?
Well, I think it's just a reflection of the kind of community that Santa Cruz is. And I mean, if every community bookstore, I think the mission always is to reflect the community they come from and to really localize the content, the event programming, the relationships. And we're just lucky to be in a place like Santa Cruz because it's an engaged community. It's a community that leads with its values. It's a community that values local spaces and local businesses and the role they play in the sustainable economy. We're thrilled that we're accepted into that community, and we, very much spend a lot of time thinking about what role we can play in supporting that community and being active and part of that community. And I think that's just like a mutual respect that grows out of that relationship.
And so much like different kinds of markets, the book market has really changed quite a bit in the last probably 10 to 15 years. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges independent bookstores like Bookshop Santa Cruz or others that you're connected to are experiencing in this current book market?
Yeah, it definitely changes. It even changes kind of year to year. When I first came on, there was no such thing as ebooks. And then suddenly there was a wave of ebooks. And then suddenly they've started to disappear again. So even in the 10 years that I've been running the store, you see these kind of waves of things coming through. And you need to respond and you need to innovate and stay on top of things. I think the most sustained challenge to the industry is really Amazon. And they have such a huge part of the market and they discount books to below cost, really, so that you then get roped into their Prime membership or wanting to buy TVs or clothing or diapers or whatever else it is. But because they're discounting books, they're kind of devaluing books in their place in society, and they're really bullying the different publishers who are publishing books. They have a lot of say in what gets published at this point, and it's really destroying bookstores and downtowns. It's really cutting out a lot of the mid-list, which are not the bestsellers and not the long tail of books that are being published. And they just have a widespread impact on every community and every kind of local bookstore. So we just have to combat that by being very local and being very representative of Santa Cruz.
I heard this too from my book publisher, how Amazon is just a nightmare because they really affects the sales and the cost, and they have such a stranglehold on the market. She was telling me that it's hard to figure out how to get them out of the picture.
It's almost impossible, and I would say every publisher really sits there and says, we hate them, but we have to continue to work with them. If they don't get the terms they want from the publishers, then they take away buy buttons, and you can't access that book anymore. They really hold control over publishers, and that's that's a really scary thought when you're talking about something like books that are kind of the basis of our democracy and freedom of thought and discussion and all those other things. So publishers have to deal with them, but publishers are also trying to figure out how to make sure that independents and other retail stores are supported enough so that we can kind of combat that monopolistic environment that Amazon's created.
Anytime a book author mentions their book on Twitter or something, I always reply back with like, look at the independent bookstores, because they're always promoting the link their book to Amazon. And these are, progressive scholars. And so I'm always the annoying one that said, here's your link to your independent bookstore.
Well, we
and support
that.
them. So you are the second generation owner of Bookshop Santa Cruz. So tell us about the first generation, you're being your parents. Why did your parents purchase this bookstore in 1973? And did they or you ever imagine it to be the established institution it is now?
It's funny, we have a love letter between my dad and my mom. He was in California and my mom was in Boston at the time. And my dad's sister, my Aunt Sheila, was in the first class at UCSC. And so he came to visit her and wrote my mom this love letter saying, like, there's this amazing town that is just about to have a university and it's really changing. And I think this would be a great place for a bookstore. And so that's how they came here. The store actually wasn't for sale. They heard it was for sale. They came and made an offer and it actually wasn't for sale. But then the owner was like, oh, well, that sounds like a good idea. So I kind of feel like a lot of things happened to make it all come together. And, they really saw it as a center of the community. And my dad and my mom made a purposeful choice of locating downtown. And not only locating downtown because they wanted to be the heart of Santa Cruz, but they also did a lot of things like stay open really late when other people on Pacific Avenue weren't staying open late. They really led the charge to kind of say this is a really vibrant downtown and there's different ways that we should make sure this is the core of our community. So I don't think they'd be surprised that it's kind of at the heart of that ecosystem because they spent so much time and effort on it. My dad was mayor of Santa Cruz and he ran for city council after the earthquake to try to rebuild the store in the downtown. But I do think that they might have been surprised that I took it over and that it's still going. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary last year, and that's a pretty long time for an independent bookstore to have made it. So I'm sure that's a little surprising to them.
It's also the 50th anniversary of KZSC, so we actually share an anniversary with you. You're listening to Casey Coonerty Protti, the second-generation owner of Bookshop Santa Cruz and chair of the Downtown Commission for the City of Santa Cruz. What role, Casey, do you think independent bookstores should be playing or could be playing in the kind of larger resistance movement to everything that's happening around us, whether it's the rise in hate crimes, whether it's police violence, environmental destruction, climate change, LGBTQ, and so on and so on? What role do you think independent bookstores should be playing in this moment?
I think the first and most important thing is that we should be a safe place. And we've talked a lot about this with our staff, and our staff has brought things to our attention to try to make sure that we let as many groups know that they are safe in Bookshop to explore ideas or just to be. And so that is the first thing that we want to do. The second thing is I think, we need to be part of the resistance that is holding up some of our democratic institutions and ideals. And one of those that's kind of under threat is just the kind of exchange of ideas without being yelled at or talked down to or any of those things. And so I think bookstores should be at the center of that dialogue and should be about discovery of books and experiences and empathy through books that allow people to see many sides and to kind of progress forward in their thinking about where we should go from here or maybe where we came from and where we shouldn't go back to. And that's what I think we're focused on.
And so let's talk about the Words to Act On program. Where did the idea for the program come from?
So after the election, we, like most people, were pretty shell-shocked. And we came together as a store, as a staff within the store and said, what do we need to do about this? One of the things that Bookshop's always been is very political. There's a lot of bookstores and businesses too, even bookstores, who just don't want to get involved with politics. And I understand why, because there's a sense of you don't want to say you shouldn't read this book or you shouldn't read that book and only one idea is the right idea. And we definitely try not to say it in those terms, but we definitely take a point of view and we take stands when we feel like they need to reflect our values. And so we said we have a role to play. We have a space to do it. We have a voice that we need to take responsibility for. And so let's find a way of addressing some of the issues that are really of most concern and are being talked about the most. And let's find a way for our community to engage in those issues over the next year to kind of move us forward, move us out of that kind of black hole of depression that we are all in, saying, what can we do now? And so that's where Words to Act On came from.
And the subtitle to me feels just as important as the primary title, the subtitle being Education, Empathy, and Activism. How did the subtitle come to be part of the program's vision?
I think we looked at it and we said, what can we provide and what are the areas that people feel like they need to move forward on? And so one of the things is that there are books about all these subjects, and there's great books. And I think one of the ways you can find more empathy than almost anywhere else is within the pages of a book. And so we wanted to have that kind of understanding by curating reading lists so that people could engage with an issue in a lot of different perspectives on books that already exist and are already out there. And we wanted to create kids' reading lists too, because we think it's important for the next generation. And then we want to do education, which is really about digging deeper than the headlines. And, there's all these labels of fake news and headlines, and people are really only looking at issues on this really small level. And we wanted to say, you could dig deeper, and books are a great way to do that. And community conversations, having a community read, having a place to discuss this is a place to go deeper than that. But we didn't want to just sit in our four walls and have a conversation and not do something about the world and about these issues. So activism was the last piece, and really saying, okay, let's take this, let's take the momentum, let's take our understanding, and then let's take a step forward towards something that we believe in and try to create some action around some of these issues.
And so the program has involved partnering with Ecology Action, then Planned Parenthood, and now the current programming with the Community Action Board Immigration Project. Why focus on these three issues, the environment, reproductive rights or reproductive justice, and then immigration? And how did Bookshop determine, of all the issues, that are out there, how did you guys come to decide on these three core themes?
It was a very hard decision. There was lots of issues we could have focused on, and maybe we will continue with this beyond this first year and kind of grapple with some more issues. I think the way we looked at it is both what we felt was under attack immediately. For the environment, he could sign executive orders that do regulations. You could see what was happening with women. And then immigration with his travel ban. There was a lot of things coming up that said these are, really pertinent issues right now. One of the main parts of this is to partner with a local nonprofit. And that local nonprofit, we wanted to make sure we're, true partners and had a lot of programming and could reach out in the community and could provide that basis that we might not even as booksellers have in terms of reaching the people who are impacted. And so we also looked for issues where we knew that there was a nonprofit that we could work with in that way. And so it kind of narrowed it down a little bit to these three.
You were listening to Casey Coonerty Protti, the second-generation owner of Bookshop Santa Cruz and chair of the Downtown Commission for the City of Santa Cruz. So in preparing for our interview, Casey, I was rereading your letter of reflection posted during the inauguration week in January. And your closing of the letter is one that I'd like for us to talk about. And you wrote, quote, "Now more than ever, we need books. Now more than ever, we need a community that understands books as a meaningful and important tool in creating the community we want for ourselves and our children. Now more than ever, we need to reflect and to act." And this really resonated to me as a professor and as an educator, right? Because to me, books are like magic. They have that kind of power. At what point in your life did you realize that books have this transformative power?
Looking back, there's probably lots of different moments. I did also, not to paint everything in this beautiful romantic vision of growing up in a bookstore. There was definitely a time where I rebelled against my parents. Having a bookstore, every vacation we had to go to see independent bookstores, and I just wanted them to own an ice cream shop or a pizza joint or something like that instead. So it wasn't always like that. But then when I was 13, the 1989 earthquake hit Santa Cruz, and it destroyed 75% of our downtown, and it destroyed the building that Bookshop was in. And we were given just 15 minutes to get out a few personal effects that my dad ran in and got out. And then eventually he persuaded the city to allow people to go in and to save the books and the merchandise that we could start over. Otherwise, the whole thing would have been bulldozed down, and it would have been an incredible loss. It would be hard to overcome. And he went out and asked for volunteers, and they had to sign liability waivers because there's still aftershocks. And so he did this and went on the radio, actually, and asked for volunteers to show up, and 400 people showed up the next day and signed these liability waivers, went into this damaged building that unfortunately had already fallen down and killed 2 people. And they went to save the books. And, I was 13, and I think at that moment, it's what is it about a bookstore that people would do this, and about this community that they come in and literally dig these books out of the rubble? So my personal experience with books, I would say, is less about one particular book that showed me the magic of what books can do, but more within the context of a community and how it could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But you had to provide that space, and you had to make those books available so those people could have that meaningful interaction or have that book that changes their life or changes their perspective. So that was really the kind of jumping off moment for my understanding of the power of books.
In August, I interviewed a longtime volunteer of the Prisoners Literature Project, and he was talking about these letters they get from prisoners about once they're able to get a book that they've always wanted or read, just how it was incredible escape from the confinement that they're in. And so we were sort of talking about how we have to realize that books are not just words on paper, that they really can be these forms of escape for people who are in dire situations, difficult life circumstances or what have you, but that this is why books are, as you write in your letter, more than ever we need books. And we're in a kind of a weird moment where we don't necessarily have people appreciating books to the extent that they should be. So I encourage you all to read this letter from Casey that you can find on the website, bookshopsantacruz.com/reflection-action. And I'll also link it to the show's website. So Casey, you were mentioning the curated lists for the different programming that you've had for the year. So why did that also feel essential to the programming?
I think the idea was to allow people to engage on the issue on a lot of different levels, depending upon what they were looking for. So in any given book list, so the book list we have now obviously is on immigration, you could have books that are a nonfiction book that furthers your understanding of the issue or where it is in the current policy debates. You could have a book that is a fictional account of an immigration story that could just make you feel, perhaps for a second, what it feels like to be in that journey, and therefore be able to kind of respond better to providing a support for people who need support. And there's lots of different types of books. And so by creating a curated reading list, we wanted to allow people to choose what they wanted to do if they wanted to engage in the issue further. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, I've always meant to read something on X, Y, or Z, on immigration, on, Planned Parenthood, women's rights and things like that, but they didn't know where to start. So what we do is we kind of use our partners and important voices in the community and our book buying staff to say, here's a list of books that really reflect a wide range of things around this topic. And so you can engage a little by reading one, or you can engage a lot by reading a bunch of them. And that's how we came up with the different curated reading lists we have.
I would say, too, if anybody wants to form reading groups, you've got a good list now here from Bookshop on these different topics. So I think that's what's wonderful, too. Why don't you tell our listeners what are the remaining events that the community can attend as part of the Words to Act On program and how else the community can get involved in supporting your work?
Sure. This Thursday, actually, we're co-sponsoring an author event with Ali Narani. It's at Altera Solar, which is a local solar company. And he is the executive director of the National Immigration Forum and a Salinas native. And he's talking about his experience and how communities grapple with the immigration experience. So I encourage people to get tickets to that and come on out. They're free tickets, but they're still, have a limited amount of space. But our big event still to come is on Sunday, November 5th at 7 p.m. We're having this community-wide rediscussion of a book called Enrique's Journey, which traces the journey of one boy who is making his way from Honduras to the United States to find his mother, who left many years prior to get a job and be able to support her family back in Honduras. And I think it just is very reflective of what a lot of people go through on that journey. And it's going to be moderated by Fernando Leiva, who's an associate professor of Latin American and Latino studies at UCSC. And it's really an opportunity for people to come together and have a dialogue with each other about this issue and help further our understanding. So that's the main event we're asking people to come out for. But then on top of that, we have this ongoing Fund a Need campaign. And when we went to the Community Action Board Immigration Project and asked how we could support them, one of the things that came up was the various needs of the immigrant community right now who's particularly under attack. And so we created a campaign to solicit donations for specific needs. And so that could be anything from $5 or $10 that would go towards people who are detained, having a money in their commissary account, or buying gas cards for their families to be able to go out and to reach them, to buying books for the waiting rooms of Dientes and Salud para la Gente, which are serving a lot of immigrant populations, so that in the waiting rooms there's books that reflect your own experience, all the way up to providing funds to help somebody with a citizenship application. Originally it was supposed to be DACA applications, which obviously then came under attack during this campaign. But it's a really easy way to give and know that it's going directly to identifiable needs that our local partners have said these are things that people need in our community. And so we're asking people to give those donations all the way up until the end of November.
Great. So the community event, November 5th, 7 p.m. at Bookshop. And we hope people can come out for that. Enrique's Journey is a really wonderful novel, and I think it really encapsulates the education, empathy, and activism subtitle of Words to Act On. Thank you so much, Casey, for being with us today on Voces Criticas.
Thanks for having me.